small scale standalone applications. So we're now at the stage here where I think you should have enough materials there to work towards the assessment. I'm going to say towards the assessment, because some of you have still got various tasks that you do need to complete before you're ready to attempt the assessment. So I'm going to take us back when we first started this course. Of course, you came into this course understanding a little bit about the Java programming language. This was the initial unit which you ran through in block 1, developing software. This was an introduction to software using Java. So you were introduced to various things, variables, constants, expressions, some selection information, if statements, iteration in the use of loops, and different data types, of course. And then I saw you after you had finished this course. I didn't teach you this course in block 1. You had other lecturers, I believe. And I brought you in and introduced you to arrays and then array lists. So arrays were used to hold ordered collections of elements, all categorized into the one particular category. And array lists, the difference between your arrays and array lists, of course, arrays were fixed size. You only had so many elements you could add, whereas the array list, you could add an unlimited amount of elements. And we did a bit of practice also on string manipulation. And I also mentioned at the start then that strings were very important inside the graphical user interface that we use. We use Java Swing components. So everything within there is usually a text. So being text or string based, you have to then do conversions and also extract small parts of a string. For example, you're splitting up of a string, taking one part and saving that to a variable, maybe taking the other part, converting to an integer, saving that in an integer variable. So we practiced this using the license generator. We also went on and looked at some of the other applications. Caesar Cipher, again, was a text or string-based application. Contact management system was our first chance to really build a small application where we saved a name together with a telephone number as a contact inside the array list. And we then moved that on to the use of using an object with the contact management system. We haven't started or completed this, although some of my students have worked on this to understand objects a little bit more. You will get a chance to do this after you've finished the assessment, again, if you want to consolidate your understanding of the use of objects in a GUI application. So the saving and loading of the contacts, we looked at a small section of learning inside the other unit. So this was the first unit. So again, we stayed on command line, if you recall, and then we moved to the GUI. So the GUI is all described inside this unit, developing small-scale standalone apps. And we started off initially by seeing how an application is created, how a GUI application is created in NetBeans. You did this small tutorial here, where we built an adder program. This used text boxes, labels, and buttons. So your understanding of text boxes, labels, and buttons, adhering to the naming convention, of course, BTNs, LBLs, and TXTs for text areas or text boxes. Text fields are what they're known in Java. Text boxes is what Microsoft call those components or controls. Another word for those things that come on the screen, things like buttons, labels, and list boxes, is controls. Depending on which framework you work with, they're either called components or controls. So learning how to use these and the different methods that were involved in using these controls, we went on and practiced some programs. Some of you built calculators, converter programs, a small year of birth program. And at the end of that, you would have understood that to send output to the screen of a graphical user interface, instead of using system.out.println, you would be using something like set text or get text method of the component. And these methods then differ depending on the control that you work with. The text area, for example, if you use set text on a text area component, then that would overwrite everything that was on the screen. You would have had to use the append method of the text area if you wanted to continuously add something to the end of the text that's on the screen. Input, we don't use a scanner object, of course, in a graphical user interface. For input, we simply read the text that the user has typed into these components if they are read-based components. So then we moved on and tried to bring those ideas together, sending output to the screen and receiving input from the user. This time we practiced this with building a graphical user interface application where we were reading the information not from the keyboard, this time from an Access database. So we started up an Access database, created some tables within it, added some fields, and then we learned how to do this by following this Word document here. So again, this was command line application where this document here describes how you would do such a thing with the command line. And we were sending the data that we read from the database out to the standard output screen in NetBeans. So this was again using system.out.println. The drivers, of course, are here that you need to use, the drivers for the database. And I also gave you a program, a finished program that you could use once you've completed your own application. All the guidelines for these sections, folks, as you know, is in My City. Each a small piece of learning that you had to do, all the information, all the resources are all in this Moodle. We then moved on and I introduced you to the text area and the combo box. Now, the combo box again gave us its own means of understanding how to use the combo box. The list box again would have its own set of methods that are used to add things to a list box, and check boxes, toggle buttons, radio buttons, all of these components again have their own specific method for a programmer to read the interaction that the user has performed on that user interface. Remember, a user interface application is what is termed as an event-driven application. Instead of the code following the steps laid out in a main method, the code that runs is the code that the user has interacted with, or based on other events. Other events that you've seen was the window opened event. When a program fires up, when a program loads into memory, you could run a section of code, and that was the window opened event. Of course, these events exist for all of those controls. Lots of different events can be trapped. I call them trapped. It's probably not the correct terminology used by those, but when you trap an event, you're effectively creating a method. Inside that method, you add your code that you want to run when that method or event is executed, depending on either the automatic event, such as program firing up, window opened event, or user clicking on a combo box or a button. Moving on to handling images. Now, images are important inside applications. Of course, they allow us to bring a nice user interface to our end clients, the folks that are going to use our application. So this small tutorial here, again on the NetBeans website, gives you an introduction to how you can use images inside your applications. And this is where you brought a new package into your project. And inside that new package, you would add some images and then programmatically access those images using the get resource method. The get resource method was, you were shown how to do this inside the tutorial. We then moved on again further after the image after understanding how images work, how the database drivers are set up, how the connection happens, we then built a small read-only application. This is a countries and capitals app, where we used the same idea that we used in the connect and access database to a Java GUI. This was task 3, reading from the database, reading those small number of contacts, and updating a text area. So read database and update a control on the screen. This was read. So this application could form your reference point for any time you want to use the code, the database access components to read information from a database. Countries and capitals applies this again to another scenario where you had a front end that could be used to interact with the database. Some of you completed this. I will just bring one of these up just to show you. I will fire up maybe Greg's or Callum's, either one. This is Greg's countries and capitals. And if you have a look at the screen, we have a combo box, a label for output, and an image displayed in a label control. So here, the user, when the program first runs, the window opened event is used to populate the combo box, again, through the connection to the database, reading the records, updating the combo box items. And then when the user clicks on the combo box, we're trapping the action performed method of the combo box. And that action performed method allows us to then run another method. And that method does the same thing again, goes to the database, pulls back the capital associated with the country, and then updates that using set text on the label. And at the same time, you can use the same country name in conjunction with a bit of string concatenation, where you would add the file extension for that image, PNG or G or JPEG or whichever it is image type that you're using, and using get resource again to read the flag for that country and display this on the screen as well. So a nice small application, self-contained, that you built using this, the ideas introduced to you for GUI building. That was the countries and capitals app. Now you'll notice that in each section, I am giving you as much information as possible for you to build these small apps. Task 4, if you read through this, I'm telling you, you can use the window opened event of JFrame, action performed of the combo to read the information that the user has interacted with, to read the selected item. Now, these methods for the combo are also listed inside this section here using GUI components, where I explain the 2 different types. So adding data to combo boxes, use the add item. And when you're reading, we use the get selected item, which you can cast to a string, or you can use .toString to read out the string of the selected item that the user has interacted with on the combo box. This was just read, so we're just reading information here. Of course, there's lots of other operations that you can do with a database. Now, these operations are generically known as the CRUD operations, C-R-U-D. So C for create, R for read, U for update, and D for delete. So the next application that you're building, or if you've built this, this is what you'll be building, something which uses all of those database operations, the CRUD operations. So read, insert, delete, update, and lastly, another SQL operation, which would be for searching, and also then incorporating images inside the same app again. So reading data this time, when you're reading the information from the database, we have a database which contains these 3 fields: the ID, quote, and the author. ID, quote, and author. So 3 data fields. One's a number, the other two are text. And these are then used, you'll populate these with some quotations, which you can get from this website, fill them in. The combo box should display something like this: a number, which is the ID, followed by a colon, and then just the first 10 characters of the quotation. Because it's a combo box drop down, we don't want to display the full quotation in there. When the user interacts with that combo box, then again, the action performed of the combo is fired, goes to the database, brings back the full quotation, and brings back the actual quote, and populates a text area on the screen with the full quotation, and at the same time setting up, showing the author of that quotation in a different control on the screen. So combo box, text area, and a label, or possibly a text field, could be used to build the GUI for this. Now, because we have lots of different operations on the same app, it makes sense to use a different type of container to contain all those sections. And this is where we will use the tabbed pane component. The tabbed pane is a means of creating a tabbed view of the Quotations app, which I'll just show you by jumping into a quick demonstration of the screenshot that you would use for the Quotations app. To close this one down, sorry, it's not in here. Come back to here. And I'm going to a different class, so I'll go to one of my other classes. So Thursday AM class, and this is just some of the work these guys have completed. So have a look at some of the screens that these guys have done. Kyle. So this is the tabbed component. So it shows tabs for doing the different operations. So view tab, add, delete, update, and this guy's not got the search, but the search would be another thing. And also you would be bringing in images. So there's Jonathan's. So Jonathan, again, the combo box contains just a small snapshot of the quote, an image of the author, and the actual quote comes up inside the text area. Now, a slightly different interface that Jonathan has built, not the same as some of the others. So again, these are all small applications that you're building. So this is Essence. So he has the insert, delete, update, search, and about, and various things that you would do within here. Author field, the quote is a text area, some buttons. And then when you interact with the combo box or add, so he's showing different screens for adding or inserting. So here's the delete operation. Now, when you're deleting or updating a record in the database, this is where you need to know the ID. You need to know this number. And this one solution to that is to save the ID inside the actual item inside the combo box. And that's what I suggest. I also suggest this inside my notes here. So when you're reading or updating the combo box, always add the ID in to the quote, so that when the user does interact with the application, you read that string back, and then using some string manipulation methods, basically the index off operation, index off would give you the position of the colon inside the combo box. You can then use substring to extract the number, convert it to an integer, cast it into an integer data type, and then use that number when you're reading the actual quote from the user. So that reading of the quote would come by using a different kind of SQL statement, and that SQL statement is going to be the select where the ID equals the start number. So it's a different form of read that you would do within here. And then the insert application is going to be created in the other tabs. You see you have different tabs. Depending on which tab you're working on, you would be bringing in different versions of SQL into your tabs. So these, if you look at these, this application, the Quotation App, starts off with reading, then the insertion, deletion, delete a record, update a record. So if you've found a record and say, for example, you want to update the author's name, which was not typed in correctly, or maybe you want to actually change the author, change the actual quotation itself, then you would use execute update method. So again, you're given this guideline inside these sections, execute update, to update that section inside the database. You would, of course, have to programmatically build up an SQL string that you send to the database. And again, this is where all our string manipulation programs, small examples that we've built before in the past, will help you. The ability to extract things from strings, move things around, take out little bits, maybe convert them into integers or double data types and so on. This is all a normal day-to-day thing that developers would need to understand. And again, I've given you lots of kind of various resources that can help you do that as well. For a refresher, you could come back into this, my introduction unit, and take a look at this section, strings, string operations, and converting strings. So this kind of describes some of these different methods of a string object in Java that you can use. Then the search, so read, insert, delete, they all have their own specific operations, specific SQL types that you would use within these, and then the searching. Once you've built the searching, you brought in your authors, you basically have the Quotation App completed. Now, one of the difficulties that you would have come across in this situation then is that all your database access code, all of your database access code would be inside those methods. And if you looked at our database access code, then that's we hard code the folder name into there. That was the data folder, and also the database name gets hard coded within there. We use those three SQL objects: the connection object, the statement object, and the result set object. These three objects, part of the SQL framework or the SQL classes that are used in Java, are what's necessary to connect our graphical user interface, reading the data from the database and updating the screen. However, that method which I've introduced you to here, folks, is not the best solution for creating database-driven applications. This section, section 22, goes on and explains how data access code, if you spread it everywhere in your GUI, it's very difficult to change, optimize, and modify in future. Now, most applications that are created commercially don't have any data access code inside the GUI code. Now, one of the benefits for that, of course, is that if all that data access code was in its own level, in its own separated class, then you're able to change the front end depending on which type of app you want to build. You could very easily then build a mobile phone app using the iOS components or the Android components. They would simply go to the method, the relevant method, ask the method, go to the database, get me this data, and I will update the screen. You could very easily build, as we've been doing, desktop applications or even web-based applications Web-based applications, of course, are going to use HTML and JavaScript and various other things within their screens. So the front end, we try to separate out the front end from the database code. Again, if the database decided to be upgraded, some companies just like to build small prototypes using Access and then maybe move those applications onto SQL Server, which is a Microsoft database, or even Oracle, or possibly use some cloud database. So if your data access coding is all held separately, it's very easy to change that in one area. You don't have to then go and start messing about with the GUI to identify all the bits where the data was accessed. So everything, this is why the connection object gets defined in one location, and it's not just copy and pasted everywhere. You need to connect to the database. So this section here, what I will do is I will give you a video describing this. So I have a presentation here. You're welcome to read through this just now, although I haven't covered it with you just now. And best point for me to cover that is once you've completed all of the Quotations app. But what I will do is I will give you a video describing this whole section. And that allows you to have a think through on how you can separate and split out your database access code. Now, with a desktop application, that makes sense very much, in that you're separating out the business logic from the front end to the database. So basically, you're building up kind of a multi-tier type application where tier 1 is the database, tier 2 is the actual logic that's used within the things which the objects are going to be using. With our countries and capitals app, for example, we could have had a capital class, a country capital class, where we send a country to that class, and then the class, some method, uses the return keyword to return the capital. Instead of going directly to the database, we use that object to do the go and find this and come back to me with just the data that's necessary for me to update my screen. So if you think of these methods, then they become independent entities, independent items where I send a parameter to them and they return back the data that I use to update my graphical user interface. So if I had a method which takes a country, returns back a capital, then if that method was reusable, I could very easily build a mobile app along the same principles, very easily build a web-based app on the same principles. So this data separation and the use of classes is a section that I will introduce to you through the use of our video. So I'll put this in a video, and if you have any questions or queries based on that information, then we can have the opportunity to have a one-to-one session to kind of make sense of what that's all about. Now, this section here, where we have the designing of your applications, the first stage in any software development endeavor that companies take on board is to sit with a client and try and make sense of what the client wants, try and make sense of the final program that they're interested in. The assessment for this unit is the electronic point of sale assessment. So for that, I've given you basic requirements. From those basic requirements, you've got to then think of a design. Now, each of your designs will be different. I don't want to put you down the path of use my design, it's the best design. You may think that you've got another design, but once you have that design, again, I need to okay that before you start to move on to the development of your application. So you can use this tool. Now, this is Balsamiq. Balsamiq is a low fidelity wireframing tool. There are two types of prototypes you can build. You can use low fidelity, you can use high fidelity. Again, you could Google these terms and look up what a low fidelity wireframing tool is compared to a high fidelity. Low fidelity is very much sketchy. It's like a cartoony type front end that you're building. And the cartoony type front ends have their benefits. in that the clients don't have high expectations of what you're building for them. If you decided to build these prototypes or designs inside NetBeans, for example, then your customer may think that's exactly what they're going to get when the program is finished. With a sketch, they know it's roughly going to look like this. And if you decide to sort of move away from that rough design, then that makes sense, because you can never fully capture what you're building right at the start. There's an iterative process of going back to the customer and coming and sort of moving in that manner towards the final design which the customer wants. Now, the actual designing of your application is quite a crucial part, because at the end of the day, the application is going to be used by end users, and these end users are going to have to use this application day in, day out. With the electronic point of sale application, this might form the basis of an actual EPOS application that's going to go into production in a shop. A student of mine 2 years back decided to take the EPOS application to the next level. They created an EPOS for their father's takeaway, and they used a touch screen to build all the products into that application. So there is the chance, if you really wanted to take this a little step further. Of course, employers do like to see that you take assessments further. They do like to see that you've built things on your own, or you've taken the initiative to learn more than what's required by assessments. So the testing, of course, then once you've finished your application, we want to then test that application. So herein comes the usability test. Once you've created the design, I've okayed the design for the EPOS, you then start to build. Once you've got the design built, you then pass it on to some users and ask them, tell me, what do you think of this app? And they'll give you their feedback. You then take that feedback, create a report based on that feedback, and either modify your application, or you can leave it at that. The assessment doesn't require you to modify your app at that stage. It's just so that you can understand that the end user really is the king inside this. They're the persons that's eventually going to approve or disapprove the app. Just like a dish in a restaurant. If you go to a restaurant and you ask for some food, and if the visual look and feel of that dish is not too appealing to the customer, then they may take their custom elsewhere. An application is the same. Make it look good, please your end user, make it easy for them to use, and they'll keep coming back to you for more applications. So you can add this to your quotations app if you want. This is a quote by Asmat. Oh, that's me. So chefs take pride in the visual look of the dish they serve to their customers. Take pride in your user interface design usability, and your clients will love not only your applications, but your company too. So any company that produces these well-designed applications always have happy customers. If you give them something that's very difficult to use, of course, they'll start to dislike your other products as well. Now, UX design is a huge industry in itself. So again, you can search UX design. UX designers are employed by companies to come up with the best interface that a customer that they can add into their products. This section here is really just an extension of what we've kind of covered earlier. So some of the naming convention documents are here. Build tools. If you want to learn how Apache Ant is used inside NetBeans, again, you can follow these. I won't be covering these sections. Once you've finished your EPOS application and you want to do some more practice, preparing you for next year a little bit better, you can then go on and build some more applications. This one here, the spices application, database of spices, combo boxes with spice names, find a spice, clove, for example, or cardamom, display a picture, a description, and allow the user to build a base. Basically, it's a database of spices and descriptions and images that's created here. The spice app I also use inside separation section. And I give you a NetBeans project here, partially completed version 1, and another partially completed one, which uses the database to allow security to be built in to the application. So a username and password to be entered before the user can use the app. Now, because these use the tabbed pane, the tabbed pane makes it very easy to show and hide tabs in an application. So if you have different levels of users, ordinary user and an administrator, if the ordinary user logs in, you can very easily hide the tab, the whole section that has the admin features within it. That can easily be removed. And in this tutorial here, I show you how this is done, how to build a tabbed pane application, and also how to code a login box that gets displayed on the startup of a form. And this tutorial here, PDF, which I'll open up, shows you how to code your login dialogues. Uses a JFrame, and panels get dropped onto a tabbed component. That's how you add tabs into your GUI app. We trap the window opened event to fill up some details. And then we use a method which programmatically builds up a username password dialog box for the user. Now, programmatically building up a dialog box is described in here. Most commercial companies don't use the designer that you've been working with. The designer in NetBeans, where you can drag and drop various components, that is not used by the majority of companies that build either your Java Swing framework applications or Java FX, which is another GUI framework that's used in Java. Both of these, they use in the programmers would programmatically build these up. So here you're creating a JLabel component, for example, text fields, password fields, storing these all inside an object array, and then displaying them using a JOption pane, which is quite a flexible component, the JOption pane. And that's what brings up. So the JOption pane being displayed then asks the user to type something in to those components, the text fields, takes the username, takes the password, compares it. This tutorial just compares it to a hard-coded username and password. We're just looking for user, and I think it's just the number 2 for their password or number 1 for their password if it's an ordinary user or admin, depending on what you're going to be using. And if the user doesn't have access, you can give them a nice message to say that you don't have access. Now, this uses hard-coded usernames and password. The section which I've shown you before, the data separation section, I give you an example of how to use the database, for logging in a user. So this was this section here, and the version 3 of the Spices project uses the database to check if the username and password is true. If you want to take your EPOS application security a little step further, then instead of using plain text in your database, you can go back to my other unit where I show you a section here on password hashing. So password hashing allows you to build in encrypted username and passwords. So this section here, you can look at these types of encryption methods to hash the username and password in the database. And this, of course, builds in security. If anyone manages to get hold of the database and tries to open the database just to read those usernames and passwords, they'll all be hashed. They will all be encrypted in a form that the end user can't use. So this then really forms all the learning that's necessary for this unit, folks. And once you've gone through these various sections and built these various sections, you're then ready to attempt the assessment. So at this point onwards, I'm going to leave you either to walk your way through those sections. In other words, take it easy, build maybe a section each day, or you can sprint through. You can take a full weekend and decide, I'm going to build the Quotations app this weekend, complete that whole thing, and then move on to designing your application and so on. So you can either walk, go slow. You have 12 weeks to complete the assessment, of course. You can either walk, you can run, or you can fly, as some of my other students are. Some of you in here may want to fly through as well, which means that you just spend a full concentrated effort in completing this unit, putting away all your Netflix series, putting away all your YouTube watching, TikToking, put that all to the bin, switch off your phones, don't contact mates, don't contact friends, and just head down and just work hard on this, which does make sense, I think. If you really want to understand programming and prepare yourself well for next year, then I would thoroughly recommend that you go through and try all these different sections and fully understand how it is that we build these GUI applications using object-oriented programming, coding techniques, separating out data in conjunction with a database, and building nice user interfaces. Go and read up some videos on UX design, go and research other people's EPOS applications and get a feel for how those EPOS applications allow users to interact with them. So for an EPOS application, remember, speed is very crucial. You don't want to have an interface where the user is clicking too many times. You might have a long queue forming behind you. Remember, this is an application which the user agent uses. It's not for end customers. It's not like the EPOS self-checkouts that you see in Tesco's or Lidl's or Aldi or wherever you use these. It's the type of EPOS screen which someone in McDonald's, for example, uses when you drive through or you go to the desk or the counter. The user, the customer serving you, that's what they are doing. So you want to build something that's quite easy and good to use. So you may decide to go and research UX design. The actual application, the actual assessment then is all described. I've put this into a video on YouTube, which I would like you all to, when you're ready for the assessment, to open up, watch in conjunction with the requirements document. And that's requirements document is here, EPOS assessment. I'll open this up in a different link just to show you. I also give you a sample database structure that you could use and a usability testing document for when you finish your application. So the requirements document, that's it here. This describes the application. So this first part has come from SQA. That's what they want us to assess you on. You're handing in your user interface design, the code, showing me that the application is working, screenshots. Then your usability test, where you've passed the program on to a few users, end users, and asked them to give you recommendations on improving that UX design. The actual application is shown here. So we've got a bit of background, two types of users, a sales agent and a manager. Security features, we need a login screen. So again, you can go back to the Spices application and have a look to see how I coded connection to the database, which uses a user object and it separates out the data access code for you as well. So that Spices application is quite an important one if you want to understand security and also having users as objects in your application. Users will have different status. Some of them may be referred to as sales agent, some referred to as manager. Any questions you've got on the requirements, folks, keep those. Any questions that you've got, I would recommend that you keep those and add them in as comments at the end of the video, because bear in mind, I've got 4 or 5 classes of small scale standalone, and everyone will have questions. In the initial analysis stage, I would like you all to read the comments that others have posted and read my replies to those comments. If there's not there, then you ask, you comment, and I will reply back to that. And this way it helps other people that are going to be coming in and having the same thoughts or same questions that they're wanting. So in the actual YouTube video, then I would like you to read, watch, any comments you have, add them to the end of this YouTube video, and I will, of course, then reply to you, giving you more clarification and guidance on the app that you're building. I'll give you an example database here as well that could be used for the EPOS, and that's listed here. So this is based on the app which I built as a prototype for this unit, which I will show you that app later. I don't want that to affect your design. I don't want you to simply take my design and take that. I want you to have a think about this, how you would design that based on the requirements. This is normal for any software development. Of course, you design something, you show it to the client. Are you happy? No, I don't like this, or you haven't thought about this. And then you go back and you design again, and you keep going backwards and forwards until you have something that the customer is happy that they could work with, and you're happy that you could code. And in the same manner, I give you this database that you could use within the EPOS app. So product names, descriptions. You can sell any product. It doesn't have to be food, although the app which I built was based on food. You could have an EPOS app for a coffee shop. So you're again, remember, it's the user agents that use these, not the customers. So they would click and tap 5 lattes, price comes up, 6, I don't know, cookies, price comes up, checkout, total price then gets saved to the database. Now, all the transactions that take place in your application, those get saved. So you'd save those, save all the transactions in an array list, which you could then, of course, stick into the database or read from the database. It's just the final amounts that we need, the final totals from each customer. So one customer might come in and purchase 4 or 5 items, and their total bill comes to £10.20. You would stick that £10.20 into an array list of data type double, something that accepts decimal points. And every customer that comes in, when you hit the checkout, save those numbers, save those amounts or values of the customer's order. Once you have all those customer orders, you would have another tab on your application where you can bring out reports on those sales. And this is the sales that you would be needing to bring out from there are how many customers you served, the total of all those sales, the average, the minimum, and the maximum. Now, when you look at the averaging, the minimum, the maximum, and the total, that should immediately ring in your head that we did this something similar when we created the arrays task. You remember we did something very similar in the arrays task when I introduced you to the array. So this also required you to code total, average, lowest, and highest. So you can revisit that project which you created here to gain an understanding on how you would produce this report. Coding would be very similar. So stage 1 of the EPOS then, design using Balsamiq. I give you the license code for Balsamiq as well, that's also there. That license code is time limited to the end of June. Balsamic's a great company. I've been recommending it to students at the last college I worked in, and also here. And they also have a cloud version that can be used. They also have a great story. So read up how the company started up and how they actually brought this product to it for everyone to use. So you design using Balsamic. You then build the application once I've approved your design, create test cases, screenshots, test it and deploy it, make sure it runs independently of the NetBeans environment. And remember, I introduced you to how to independently run a program in the very first program which you created, the adder program. This was in NetBeans. You go to the clean build, which creates a dist folder, a dist folder, and then inside there is your java.jar file, which is an automatically executable file. That all uses Ant. Ant is a build tool. That's what builds your system. That's why we chose Java with Ant when you start up NetBeans. Ant is a section in itself. You can go and search Apache Ant. It's an open source system where it builds the classes and compacts the whole thing together into one unit for us. So you test and deploy, and then your usability test at the end of it. What you've got to fill up in this document then is this small test sheet. User login. When the user logs in, ordinary user logs in, does the manager tab disappear? And this is where you would fill this in. When the manager logs in, you want to see all the tabs, all the features. Pick a quantity, pick a product. Add those quantity and products to the basket. And again, you can use a text area on the screen. So as the products are being selected, those products would be displayed to the sales agent, giving them an indication of the items that they've picked. Any products which are completed, then the user then goes to checkout. The sales cost gets displayed to the user. The data gets saved. Another one is if the user wants to clear an order, there should be a button to clear the order, just in case a customer comes, decides to cancel the order, clear it. And then the report section. In the report, all we're really interested in is how many were served, what's the total sales cost, what's the minimum, the lowest sale, highest sale, and the average of the day. Then a sales restart button, which would clear the database of all of the sales. Now, if your database followed something like this that I give you here, then you would have three tables. Products table, which would hold all the products. A sales table, which would hold an employee number together with the sale value. And another table which would hold the users within it. So here, if you see, I've got the employee number, first name, last name, a password for the user, and also the role of the user. So the role of the user in my app, I simply used, I think, manager and agent, or M and A, depending on the user that was being created. Now, there will be an opportunity to introduce CRUD into here, where you can then create users. So the managers should be allowed to create users, insert a user into the database. This would be a form that you'd fill in. So new user, space for employee number, first name, last name, password, role, click, that adds the user into the database. Then when that user logs in, you would use that user's status or role to hide or show the admin tabs, the tabs which allow clearing of the data, for example. Ordinary users shouldn't be allowed to clear the database of all of its, shouldn't be allowed to clear and do this sales restart, for example. Only managers should be allowed to see that. So that feature would only come in a tab which managers can see. Clearing of orders is available to all. Checkout. Reports should only be viewed by the user. So if I'm a user and I've logged in, I only want to see the report for myself. So whoever logs in should only see their own report. Now, you could take it a step further and say if a manager logs in, allow them to see the reports for all of the users. So the manager would have a number of sales agents. And if I decide to go in and see Bob's, how many customers did Bob serve today? Then I should be able to see that. Or how many customers did Jenna serve today? And I would be able to see that as well. So you could build that in. You don't have to do that one. You can just show the report of the logged on user at that point. So this gets filled, and then any errors that you come across, you can screenshot those. Any solutions that you went and created based on those errors, you can start to gather all of these. Deployment, any issues that arose during the deployment. The deployment, of course, is let's now ship the product out to our customers. And this is where you would do the clean build it completely separately, make sure the database works in conjunction with that, and all the images, for example, if you're using images on your buttons, make sure those load up as required as well. What do I need when you finish this? I will need you to submit some things. So your submissions come in here. These are all the upload links. So submission 1 is your design document, Balsamiq PDF. Use Balsamiq, design your app, convert, save as PDF, upload. I will take a look at that, approve it, and say, right, go ahead, start building. Then you'll start building. And once you've completed your NetBeans project, then you'll upload to this link together with all the NetBeans projects, the executable folder, that's the dist folder, your usability test, your recommendations, and also all screenshots showing that the features of your application are working based on the requirements. That's basically giving me assurance that you've covered everything that's necessary within that app. So therein, folks, that's the full course and everything that's expected of you to sort of work your way through, moving towards the final assessment. This is, of course, going to be very, very helpful to you all when you move on to next year, where you start to look more in-depth object-oriented programming and object-oriented design, building user interfaces and so on within your Year 2 Java courses.